Can be bringing themselves to order. Louise, do bring that up because we think.
Well, I've got this one because I've got an OSI, so I'm not.
Councillor Nagy, okay. Yeah, I will say why, or you can.
No, I'll leave it to you.
Right. We now move on to the second of the Staplehurst applications for this evening. Just to tell members, please don't snap, Councillor Borton, but we do have 2 urgent updates. This is an issue we will be considering in the near future. We are on item 17, page 84, land at Fisher's Farm. Mr. Timms.
Thank you, Chair. I'll run through this quickly. Many of the points have been covered previously. Similarities with the neighbouring site. We can see the site here outlined in red. It's larger than the site to the west at 9.8 hectares. Again, similarly divided by hedge and tree lines and a number of ponds on the site. Railway line to the north and the application we've just recommended to the west. Headcorn Road to the south, and we have Pile Lane here, which runs along the east side of the site. Again, the western edge doesn't follow any physical boundary. Site's in the countryside, and there is a public right-of-way which runs through the site, roughly where my arrow is showing. Just running through the photographs. This is Pile Lane, you can see here, and Headcorn Road is running along here. The access is proposed to come through here. It's a similar position, just looking back towards the village along Headcorn Road. This is up Pile Lane. This is the eastern boundary of the site, heavily treed and hedged boundary there. Slightly further up, which you can see the site is on the left here. And this is looking back down on Pile Lane, Headcorn Road at the bottom with the site on the right. This is from within the site. This is the site boundary is actually here. This is the eastern edge, and the photo's taken from the public right-of-way, which runs along here and then heads in this direction. And this is at the southern end of the site, the Bovis site to the left, and this is the application site heading north, and this is the eastern boundary. Just running through the proposal. As I said, the main vehicular access is at the south here, and it incorporates, Pile Lane, and Pile Lane will be realigned to run into the site. There will be a secondary access onto Pile Lane in the corner here. Again, there are pedestrian and cycle links into the Bovis site, and also via the public right-of-way at the top here, which links onto Fisher's Road. A main central spine road, again with roads coming off and running through the landscape features of the site. Similar to the Bovis scheme, traditional houses are proposed, 2.5 storey, and a number of apartment blocks, which would be at 3 storey. Affordable housing, again, at 40%. And it's considered that there is good connectivity with the Bovis scheme, which has been negotiated. I won't run through the policy issues again. They're the same as the previous item. And in terms of the visual impact, again, that's considered to be low and localised. The design is considered to be of a high quality. And again, I won't run through the highways impacts, save for that the access points for this site itself are considered to be acceptable. The cumulative issues have been discussed previously. Ecology has been carefully considered. Again, it's retaining the hedge and tree lines. That's the key to the layout, which ensures protection of ecology interests. Flooding and drainage is dealt by condition. And again, there would be contributions towards infrastructure. And as outlined in the report, permission is recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Timms. Admirably concise. We now move to the first speaker on this particular application, which is Mrs. Thatcher. No relative, one assumes. I'm sorry, you can't know. Apologies.
Good evening, Mr Chairman, members, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Karen Thatcher. I'm a chartered architect and I represent the residents of Pyle Lane and the rest of the lane to the north, Couchman Green and Sweetlands Lane. We totally object to the Red Row proposal to have a road link into Pyle Lane. At the moment, this lane is used as a rat run between the A229 and the Headcorn Road. It does not have the capacity to have two-way traffic. The verges are being eroded and it is dangerous. The proposed entrance for the Red Row site is directly opposite Home Farm. This is a commercial working kennels. There are over 120 dogs on this site, and then outside it, to go into or come out of this site, headlights will light up the two principal living rooms of this old farmhouse. Also, it's directly opposite their main entrance to their yard, where they have deliveries of dogs, vehicles, visitors, regularly, daily, and particularly at weekends. To have an entrance on a sharp bend like this and at a junction, I think was just waiting for an accident to happen. In order for them to load up the dogs to go to kennels, there are vans with dogs with tens of thousands of pounds, and you're proposing a junction right on this entrance. It's totally unacceptable. The other thing in the letter from KCC, which I only found on the website this week, September 2006, KCC Highways have actually said that this lane is unsuitable and should not be used as part of this development. I think other thing too, that listening to the other items earlier, you've got a contribution to the school in Headcorn for these sites. There's no bus run from Staplehurst to Headcorn. The road between Staplehurst and Headcorn for people to ferry their children to school have got to go over the two bridges. And that is totally badly considered, in my opinion. I think any development like this should be sustainable within the village of Staplehurst. One thing that you have not addressed, and I don't think it should be down to conditions, is the drainage. Foul drainage, the southern drainage farm, which is just to the north of these sites, is under full capacity. And the pressurised main, which pumps all the outflow from that field, from that site to the belt, is constantly under maintenance because it's in poor condition, and that would have to be, significantly improved. Finally, I come to surface water. I've read the reports on the two sites, and they are just a fudge. At the moment, these two sites are completely waterlogged in the winter months, and the water pours across Pyle Lane to try and get to the outlet on the southern side of the railway.
As you can probably tell, that means that's 3 minutes.
Yes, sorry.
Sorry about the startling noise.
That's all right.
Sorry about the slightly startling noise, members. We come now to Councillor Miss Sharp of Staplehurst Parish Council.
Thank you, Chair. Staplehurst Parish Council recommends that much more consideration is needed before planning permission is granted. This development site identified for housing is on the Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan, which has been passed by the Inspector for referendum taking place next week, in order to conform with the emerging local plan. It is not a popular site with many current parishioners. Planning officers for NBC have previously indicated that a master plan for this site and the adjoining site to the west, as well as the Fisher's Oath site to the north, would be required to ensure that the whole site was able to relate to and connect to the wider Staplehurst community. Both the local plan and the neighbourhood plan show them as a single site and therefore should surely have a single master plan. The proposals so far for the junction of the A229 and Headcorn Road, Cuckold's Corner, do not address congestion in Headcorn Road, which is already serious at peak periods. The scheme is inadequate as it makes the road layout much less convenient and less safe for pedestrians, many of which are children, wheelchair users, cyclists and bus passengers. This is not merely a crossroads, but a green heart of the village, with a listed monument and listed houses adjacent to it, which the proposed ugly railings will mar. This road may be the A229 to traffic engineers, but for Staplehurst residents, it is our village street. The railings hardly encourage pedestrian and cycling links, which are in policy H1(5) and regulation 19 of the local plan, and frankly look dangerous, which has already been addressed. The impact on the wider highway network has not been given adequate consideration. There are narrow bridges with poor sight lines on roads both the north and the east. Surface water drainage is a serious problem on this low-lying site, and more clarity is needed to assess the effect on neighbouring watercourses. There is no provision on the site for a children's play area, even though there is a mix of family houses and apartment blocks, and neither is there on the adjoining development, Bovis. Just like to point out, Jubilee Field is not in the developer's ownership. A Section 106 contribution by Red Row is proposed to the Lime Trees play area. This is 1.26 kilometres away by the shortest walking route, which involves crossing the busy A229, and that cannot be regarded as in the immediate area. There should be a play area for young children on either the Red Row or the Bovis site, which would also offer an amenity to children living in existing housing nearby. This would help to integrate this development into the existing fabric of the village, not just physically, but socially. The Parish Council would expect to be consulted on proposed conditions on the maintenance and management of both the sustainable drainage system and open spaces within the site. The construction method statement is in proposed condition 12 should also specify the times and routes for goods vehicles going to and from the site. As I said, we would like much more consideration to this planning before it was actually granted. Thank you.
Thank you. Almost exactly on time. Just a note for the record. Councillor Bryce has an other significant interest in this application, so under the rules she has had to leave. That's not because she's not interested in it, it's because she has an interest and therefore cannot take part in this discussion. So I just want people to realise that she hasn't left because she's got bored or something like that. Now, I've mentioned the urgent updates. Did the officers want to come back on, particularly the substantive point? Sorry, I do apologise. I was doing my announcement and then I forgot you. I do apologise, Miss Ashton. It's been a long day for everyone. My sincere apologies. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. Judith Ashton, Planning Consultant for Red Row. I'm here to comment on the application that's before you, having regard to what is a very detailed report. You'll be aware that the site forms part of a wider area identified within the Emerging Borough Local Plan, which is currently at examination, and also within the Neighbourhood Plan, and that the principle of development here is in effect established. The application itself has been a long time in the making. It's been the subject of detailed discussions with officers. It's been with the local authority for over a year and was the subject of pre-application consultation for nearly a year before that. It is very much a landscape and ecologically led development. It seeks to respect the character and appearance of the area and looks to reflect the aims and aspirations of the policies within the local plan and the neighbourhood plan, including those concerning connectivity. The development itself comprises a number of dwellings of traditional design to reflect the local vernacular. The majority are 2 or 2.5 stories with the occasional 3-storey unit, and they comprise a mix of apartments, detached, semi-detached and terraced properties. 40% is set aside for affordable housing. The proposed development, Councillor Harwood, if he was here, would be pleased to know, provides for a 10% reduction in the use of energy through the introduction of solar PVs and for a wide range of Section 106 contributions to local services and facilities, as well as contributions under Section 106 of the Water Industry Act to provide for upgrades to the fail drainage infrastructure, a matter that is also addressed in your Condition 17. The proposed access and arrangements onto Headcorn Road and the integration of Pyle Lane into the development has been discussed and agreed with the County Council, who have raised no objection to it. In addition, I think I would like to make it very clear that there will be a limited number of movements north along Pyle Lane onto Couchman Lane in any event. Like you, we are also concerned about safety of pedestrians and general public. We would recommend to you that, in accordance with your previous recommendation, you look to amend the recommendation in front of you in terms of the works to the crossroads. That would still provide for significant contributions towards additional bus services, the train station and a travel plan, all of which seek to reduce the use of the car and address the other transport impacts of the development. In addition, this development also provides for a relocation of the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit along Headcombe Road that will provide for better access to Jubilee playing fields. Also, I have to say, like the Parish Council previously and Mrs Thatcher, Redrow are exasperated at the fact that this development is being asked to look to make contributions towards Headcombe Primary School. Like the previous speakers, we actually feel the contribution should be towards Staplehurst. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry I mucked you about at the beginning there. As the applicant's agent has indicated, consistency draws our attention to page 113 and bullet point 7 and recommendation 8, which relates to a junction of Headcombe Road and Marden Road. So that point has been raised, and I note that's where it appears in the papers. Another point has been raised with me by certain local members in relation to housing and housing need, and rather than try and explain it myself, I'll ask Mr Timms or Mr Bailey how we might address the issue that's been raised on local housing need.
Yeah, I mean, obviously at this particular time there has been a request put forward that we consider a local housing need within one of the heads of terms. Now, it's difficult for me to say I know there's been a survey, but I'd need to speak to my housing colleagues in order to demonstrate in terms of how that would come forward. So I think the only way to deal with it at this time would be to delegate the power to the Head of Planning and Development to investigate that matter as part of the Section 106 discussions. And then, obviously, if there is a need for local housing need, it's something we could take forward and put within those discussions within the Section 106 as we progress it. But I would, at this stage, ask for delegated powers to investigate that matter, because it's not something we've done at this particular time.
So you're confident we could address that issue?
Yeah, I think we could do.
As we can.
I don't think we'd be looking at in perpetuity issues, but it's something that we could look at and have a discussion with the housing colleagues, and sort of triggers could be that it's passed in the first period of time. But I'd need to have those details discussions with the housing colleagues first, and hence that's why I request the delegated authority.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr Bailey. That was an important point that had been raised by various people in and around the Staplehurst area. Obviously, there's some work to be done on that. Councillor Powell, were you indicating to speak at this point?
It was just some observations again, Mr Chairman. I mean, once again we heard that the lane, or the access on this lane is unsuitable. That's KCC's words, not mine. Again, we heard about the surface and the drainage was at capacity. Again, we hear tonight that there's no problem with that, according to Southern Water. The entrance is on a sharp bend, so that immediately kind of raises other issues around safety. To me, this doesn't sound a sustainable location, but just my observations.
Obviously, as that's we'll come back to you, Mr. Burt. Obviously, as that's an important issue, I'll ask, first of all, Kent Highways and then our officers whether the particular issue on safety has in fact come up.
Yes, the incentive to use Pyle Lane as a rat run, an alternative means of getting to the A229, it comes back again to the crossroads. The Highway Authority's position has always been that if a robust and effective improvement is delivered at the crossroads, there will be less incentive for users of the development to use unsuitable roads, such as Pile Lane, for access to and from the A229. So, as far as we're concerned, it again comes back to the importance of mitigation at the crossroads junction.
Just to clarify, my understanding was the point being made was that the access point onto Pile Lane was dangerous, not rat running or anything like that, which, as we've said, yeah. And so if we could have Mr. Wright's view just on the safety of the access point and the visibility, if you like.
In terms of whether a compliant access layout can be achieved at that point, then yes, it can.
I'll take Councillor Burton, as he'd already indicated, before I bring the officers back on any of the other points.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to draw back on one of the points made by representative from the Parish Council on the lack of a children's play area across either of these two sites, and the fact that the nearest children's play area involves crossing a dangerous road. We're coming back here to safety considerations. Is it something within the power of this committee to place a condition or an informative, whichever is most applicable in this scenario, that a children's play area be implemented perhaps in one of the open green spaces allocated in this site?
Yeah, just to clarify, an equipped children's play area is proposed, and there is a condition that secures that.
Yeah, I think Councillor Powell just very briefly referred to issues in terms of issues from Southern Water and foul sewage. I'll just point you to pages 92 in terms of where both the Southern Water, the Environment Agency and KCC flood team in terms of the just shows indicative building heights, 2.5-storey building heights, again indicatively towards the front and the middle of the site, breaking back down to 2-storey in this area. It's the landscape master plan, so the strategy which looks at supplementing existing hedgerows. So some of them are outside the application site but in the control of the applicant. And it's also additional supplementing of the additional boundary treatment within the red line with obviously the open space area here, and as you can see the public rights of way moving through or just off the site and around here. And then it's just an aerial view. In terms of the detail issues, I don't propose to go out into the detail issues. I mean, obviously, in terms of this application, does introduce a different element because it is not a site that's shown to be allocated in the emerging local plan. It doesn't count towards the council's housing land supply issues. You're obviously aware that the neighbourhood plan doesn't allocate this site. So in terms of the weight that you can attach to EMV 28, it is your officer's view that with this particular site you can attach more weight because obviously the settlement boundary doesn't extend to include this particular area. Now, notwithstanding that issue, obviously I come back to the normal issue of substantiating where the harm arises, and as set out in your officer's report, your officer's view that given the views towards the site from the public rights of way and from the Headcorn Road, the result of the loss of the hedges, then your officers consider that there is localised but substantial harm arising from the development of this site, which will impact on the low weald and also as set out in the local plan adopted and obviously in the area of local landscape value as set out in the emerging local plan. And on that basis, officers have recommended a refusal of the application, and the fact that the substantial harm is not outweighed by the benefits arising from this scheme. So the Council acknowledges that that there are benefits arising from this scheme in the balancing exercise, but due to the substantial and significant harm, they are not outweighed. I'm not going to go into details of the highways issues, obviously because you have had those details already set out, and members have resolved to approve those other applications without the mitigation measures, and on this basis, obviously the same tables apply with this application as they did on the other schemes. So the Council is not recommending at all any ground of refusal on highways, but it is recommending those 2 grounds of refusal as set out on the reports, both in terms of landscape impact and due to the lack of a Section 106 for infrastructure. I would just add a caveat to one of the grounds. Obviously, you'll see they've been amended in the urgent update report. On ground 2, it does refer to highway matters. I think it needs to be clear that actually we just define, because the highway matters constitute also the mitigation to the bus service and also to the train station. So if obviously members go with a resolution to refuse this application tonight, obviously what I would seek is delegated authority for officers, because as part of any appeal process we have to negotiate with the applicants on a Section 106 agreement. We have to do that at an appeal, so I would seek delegated authority on that basis, and I'd also seek as a result of discussions tonight that the issues with the highway contributions obviously to the crossroads are taken out of that discussion as per the other recommendations. So I think I'll conclude on that, and the officer's recommendation is to refuse the application on the grounds cited. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. We now move on to Mr. Lord for the objectors. Mr. Lord.
Good evening. Residents are concerned about a number of issues linked to this application. Maidstone Borough Council have made 2 assessments on the appropriateness of this land for development, and for safety and environmental reasons have rejected it. Residents know how fast traffic enters the village and how congested the road gets at peak times. This development would have a significant impact on Headcorn Road. The site forms part of the low-weald landscape of local value and should be protected. It is a natural habitat for wildlife. The developer's ecological survey indicates up to 6 species of bats, 31 species of birds, of which 28 are considered to be breeding. 11 species have notable conservation status. This should not be ignored. Residents observe a range of wildlife moving from the site into their gardens regularly. This development would have an adverse impact on all of that. Residents observe that the land is subject to regular flooding, and this is of great concern. The flood risk officer identified the need for a very detailed surface water and drainage scheme, and so recognises how significant an issue this is. Residents' gardens frequently flood. The Jubilee Sports Ground close to the site also floods, and together with any water management of the river belt, it is of great concern that this proposed development would increase the risk of flooding or waterlogged ground in adjacent gardens. There is concern amongst residents that this development will place unacceptable demands and stresses on the village infrastructure. Your development contributions team identified that it will have an additional impact on delivering services. The medical centre will face increased demand and pressure, the local primary school would need to expand, or local children could end up being bused to other schools. The village sewage system regularly causes issues, and the crossroads are at saturation levels during peak times, with no practical solution existing to cope with projected increases other than accepting 100% saturation. Pedestrian links to the village centre are poor from this site, suggesting more car journeys will be generated, which again contradicts the neighbourhood plan with regards to encouraging people to walk. Many residents chose to live in the village of Staplehurst to enjoy the rural mix of countryside, community and environmental well-being. Planned and well-conceived sustainable development can sit comfortably with these factors. However, the proposed development is not in the neighbourhood or local plan and is unnecessary in terms of meeting housing supply targets. It's on land that is designated of local value, it would destroy habitat and is a site rejected as inappropriate by MBC officers. This site threatens the rural transition into the village and views to the historic church as you approach from the east. Any development along Headcorn Road will significantly impact on services for local residents, but overdevelopment has the potential to overwhelm transport and infrastructure, with the consequence that residents' quality of life could be diminished. We are encouraged that your planning officer recommends rejection of this application, and we urge the Planning Committee and MBC to make the strongest possible case for rejection to the Planning Inspectorate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Perfect timing. Councillor Mrs Buller, Staplehurst Parish Council.
Good evening, Chairman, committee members, officers and public. That's not part of my 3 minutes. Staplehurst Parish Council is pleased that the Planning Officer's report concurs with our strong reasons for refusal of this application. The site is not in the Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan, which goes to referendum next Thursday and now has significant weight. It is not part of the MBC Emerging Local Plan and was rejected in the call for sites. This is an area of open countryside forming part of the protected low-wheeled landscape. It is against policies ENV 28 and ENV 34 of your current plan. The access to the Stanley Farm site is on a bend with poor sight lines. I have stood in the proposed position. I hope members have too. Traffic speeds along this rural lane, and even with an extension of the 30-mile-an-hour zone, this will still be a dangerous exit. Traffic in the 30-mile-an-hour section of the Headcorn Road consistently exceeds the speed limit, as is proven by our Speedwatch volunteers. Any increase in traffic will put a further strain on the Headcorn Road and the crossroads. The Parish Council were against the mitigation scheme, and I'm glad to see it's now being withdrawn. This site is unsustainable as it does not contribute to the infrastructure, but rather puts unacceptable pressure on all existing services. It's 1 mile from the primary school, shops, health centre and the station. It's over half a mile from the bus stops. It will be very reliant on the use of the car and so is against MBC's transport strategy. The area is known to flood and there are issues with existing sewerage problems in the vicinity. There is no access to the centre of the village other than via the Headcorn Road. The footpath mentioned that connects to Chapel Lane is a muddy, rutted, overgrown track. Even with the suggested improvements, it will not be accessible to wheelchairs or pushchairs, has no lighting, is unsuitable in bad weather, and Chapel Lane itself has no path. No children's play area is planned on the site, and because of the poor estate design, it's remote from any such facility. Our neighbourhood plan has highlighted the disadvantages of cul-de-sac sites and promotes all new housing areas to be well linked to the existing villages by giving choices by road and on foot. This is well explained in Objective 3 and Policy 8E1 in the neighbourhood plan. The Stanley Farm site fails on all counts. The applicant claims that NBC has no 5-year housing supply, but this is incorrect. This site brings nothing to our community. This housing is not needed and is not planned for either in the neighbourhood plan or the emerging local plan. Please support the Parish Council and the residents of Staplers by refusing this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Buller. Mr Hawkins, I'm sure you're familiar with the procedure.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. As the case officer has set out, this is an application that seeks outline planning permission for residential use upon land to the east of Staplehurst. The application has been in for over a year and was previously indicated to us that it would be approved, or recommended for approval, I should say, as a sustainable and suitable site. The changes have only come about more recently. Obviously, we appreciate it's a change in policy landscape. Whilst we fully understand this is not land that has been sought to be allocated by either the Borough Council or the parish within their emerging strategies, it is our opinion that it represents a sustainable location for development. And with that, the National Planning Policy Framework sets out that sustainable development should be approved without delay. Whilst the Planning Officer's report indicates that this proposal would result in some visual harm, I would request that members consider the submission in full. The applicants, Countryside Properties, fully understand the landscape sensitivities of the site, and it's for this reason undertook a full landscape visual impact assessment prior to the submission of this application. This assessment resulted in a redesign of the scheme and the reapportionment of the public open space. This resulted in a low level of harm identified. Indeed, council officers that have previously assessed this agreed with this assessment. It should be noted that the existing properties provide a very harsh edge to the village, and this development would have afforded an opportunity to provide a more landscaped and softer entry into the settlement. The proposal does not extend significantly further eastwards than the allocations of Fisher's Farm and would lie closer to the village than the commercial and community uses along Headcorn Road. It is for this reason we consider it to be sustainable. This, together with the reinstatement of traditional field hedgerows, would, we feel, result in a development that would have very little visual impact upon the character and appearance of the locality. The issues with regards to the crossroads are well rehearsed, but as per the previous discussions, we do not believe residual impact to be severe, and this is, of course, the test. With regards to the Section 106 agreement, we completely accept that one hasn't been submitted, but obviously, if the application was recommended for approval, that would be sought under delegated powers, and we have agreed to all contributions that have been requested at this stage. It's fully understood that developments within the rural service centres are contentious, and we also understand there's a reluctance to agree more housing beyond the allocations proposed to date. However, we agree with officers that this is a sustainable location, but we do not believe the visual harm to be significant. On this basis, we have the opinion that the application should be determined in accordance with the NPPF, which requires sustainable development to be approved, irrespective of the Council's 5-year supply position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hawkins. Right, members, I've saw Mr Borton indicating. Did you wish, but yes, I was going to say, before we, don't worry, you anticipated me. I want to know whether you wish to exercise your reserve right to speak before I go on to members of the committee. Yes, of course. People wouldn't interrupt me halfway through a sentence.
Thank you, Chair and members. I endorse Officer's recommendation to refuse this application. It is not in the neighbourhood plan or the emerging local plan, or it's not in the emerging neighbourhood plan or the Maidstone Borough Council local plan. The housing need is met by other sites allocated in the local plan. We have several other sites allocated, which we've sat around this committee in other forms and discussed. And we also have the 2 applications that have been recommended tonight. The additional traffic flows will further exacerbate the issues around traffic. The modelling for this site was taken out of the figures that you looked at earlier this evening. So this would obviously have a significant additional impact. As been noted, it's an area that's adjacent to one of the most beautiful vistas in our village, alongside a public right-of-way, which runs from an ancient church, and people from those church worship in a listed building at the top of the hill. So, you know, there's a lot of history and heritage around this site. It impacts on a landscape of local value, as well as just, you know, really urbanising the fields of Staplehurst. The additional demands of a non-allocated housing site add to an already constrained area, especially with regard to the issues you've been discussing around the lack of primary school funding for our village. I also am extremely concerned about the layout of this site, with the access road running down the centre of the site, and I'm also concerned about what future development may take place alongside it. So thank you for your time. I urge members to follow the recommendation on the paper and refuse this site. Thank you.
Before I call members, just a couple of points. It's an indicative layout, so if we get into details of design at this point, it's a bit pointless. I know concerns are there, but it is an indicative layout, so we can't really get into possible refusals on grounds of the layout, because that is not for determination at this stage. If we were to approve it, of course, we could, in theory, give some, you know, parameters to that. But the officer's recommendation on the papers is for refusal on 2 grounds. I would say that if members want to introduce additional items for consideration for refusal or indeed approval, they should be based on very firm grounds, because it is never a good idea to add additional grounds just because one thinks we need additional grounds. And I would say that sustainability is not an issue here. It is, I think that is common ground between the applicant and the officers. The issue is the landscape harm, and at least at this stage, the Section 106. Did you wish to add anything at this point, Mr. Bailey?
No, I think that's, you've covered it all.
Sorry? No, no, I don't.
Oh, I answer, Clive. I've got nothing further to add.
Now, so, Mr. Bolton, you've been very patient.
I've been very patient, and I quite agree with the officers here, and I'd like to move the recommendations as are on the papers in front of us. I see nothing further that we can add, and I think the officers have done a good job on this one.
After I've taken the second. Councillor Prendergast, I saw your hand went up. I take it you're seconding Councillor Bolton's motion.
Yes, I'd like to second that. Thank you.
Do you wish to say anything?
No, just as, you know, I think we should advise the Planning Inspectorate our grounds of refusal as per the officer's recommendation in the urgent update. Thanks.
Right, and the legal officer just wants to make a brief comment on that before we go to the vote.
If I may, just clarification that we get delegated authority to enter into the Section 106. And also, if I could ask for some delegated authority just to tidy up the second ground of refusal, which are the heads of terms for the Section 106. It doesn't, for example, include the library provision. It does exclude, I think on what James has said, now excludes the highway works. So I would just like that to reflect what's in the report a little bit more clearer, as opposed to saying the highways matters. I understand the points, but there's also things like the travel plan, which may not be part of the highways matters, and also the rat running issues. So if I may just ask the delegated authority to clear up condition 2, refusal 2.
I'm sure that the mover and seconder will be happy with that, won't they? Okay, thank you very much. Right, I'm now going to put that recommendation for refusal as with the minor addition in relation to delegated powers to the legal officer to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate. I think that's everyone. Thank you very much, members, for your patience and for your input. Also to members of the public, We'll take a minute just to allow anyone who wishes to leave in relation to this application to do so before carrying on. And I will pass the relay baton back to the chairman of the committee with some relief.
set the machine up, so 16 definitely.
There we go. Right, members, we'll carry on. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor English for his excellent chairmanship, and it's much appreciated, I have to say. I'm going to ask you just a question. I think members of the audience have largely come for, I think it's item 16, which is Grecian Street. Am I right in saying that, or not? Dare I ask this? I don't normally ask for audience participation, but could you put your hands up who are interested in Grecian Street? There's quite a lot, isn't it? Oh, and the Barming? Oh, blimey. It sounds like an episode of Apprentice, doesn't it? Where you get...
If you look at it, you've got Mr. Gooch on both applications, so as opposed to a break, I suggest doing that, and then we can do those two.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to make a decision to change the order ever so slightly, because two of them refer to the Barming parish, and I'm going to push the Grecian Street one up, number 16, which we'll take next, if that is okay with everybody. I know it's a slight switch, but I think it makes practical sense this time around. Okay? So we'll go with Grecian Street. And that is... agenda, it says number 16, and it's 15509451, and I'll hand over to our officer who will... Yes. Okay?
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a site which has 27 garages to the south of Grecian Street. It's a backland site. Grecian Street is here to the north, Waterlow Road to the south, and the site's accessed under an archway under number 48, property used by the Samaritans. As I said, Waterlow Road, terrace houses to the south. The site's generally level, rises slightly to the southeast corner here. Running through the photographs, this is the view from Grecian Street, and you can just see here where the Samaritans sign is. That's the archway, and the access runs through there. This is now moved into the site, looking back through the access, and Grecian Street just in the distance there. And the application site comes down here with the access. Similar position, just see the archway and the access there, and the Grecian Street properties. This is looking southeast, so the access is just on the left-hand side here, so we've come into the site, we're looking down with the garages on either side. This is now at the other end of the site. Grecian Street houses here, and then just up there you're turning right to go out the access. And this is similar position, and then the Waterlow Road houses, you can just see the roofs there, which is to the south. And this is a similar position showing the Grecian Street properties, and this is just a photograph that's showing the, sorry, I'll put it on larger, a photograph showing the relationship with the Waterlow Road properties on the right there. The proposal is for the erection of 4 two-storey, 2-bedroom houses. As you can see on the layout, there'll be 1 detached house here and a terrace of 3 on this side. As I said, access is via the archway there, and each property would have 1 parking space. Now, a similar scheme came to Planning Committee previously recommended for approval. That was overturned, and there were 2 reasons for refusal. The first reason for refusal said that the development would be a cramped form of overdevelopment, representing poor design that would be out of character with the local area and resulting poor living conditions for the future occupants. And the second reason for refusal said that the development, due to its scale and its proximity and the height difference caused by the falling land profile, would have an overbearing and oppressive impact upon the occupiers of the Waterlow Road properties to the south. So the main consideration here are those 2 reasons for refusal. Now, I like to use this plan to compare with the previous scheme. So in terms of reason for refusal 1, which was the cramped overdevelopment, there were 2 dwellings proposed here, semi-detached pair. That's been taken down to 1 dwelling, and you can see that that's been moved off the boundary, about 3 metres, providing more space here. And we've got 3, still got the terrace 3, but they've been moved further north. But basically, it's come down from 5 dwellings to 4 dwellings. And it's officers' view that that provides sufficient layout and overcomes that first reason for refusal. In addition, it's considered that the gardens, sufficient size, and the outlook and privacy standards are acceptable. In terms of the second reason for refusal, that related to the properties on Waterlow Road. And I'd just like to use this cross-section to, again, show the differences between the two. This is the terraced row, and this is the Waterlow properties here, Waterlow Road properties here. Sorry. This was the previously refused scheme. That was within a metre of the boundary, and you can see the Waterlow Road properties there. They're not to the same scale, unfortunately, but you can see that that's moved off the boundary and part of the first floor section has been removed. So it's our view, in terms of the terrace row, that has overcome the overbearing and oppressive impact by moving it away and removing a first floor section. For the detached house, so this is at the other end, previously it was 2 dwellings, much closer to the boundary. That has been shifted around 3 metres, and it's obviously a single dwelling now. And again, we consider that that no longer has a harmful impact upon Waterlow Road and overcomes the second reason for refusal. So in conclusion, we consider the dropping of 5 houses to 4, the more spacious scheme, and moving it away from the boundary has overcome those grounds for refusal, and we're recommending approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I would like to call upon Ms Granger as an objector, please.
Good evening. Here we go again. Third application, fourth design. The application and associated documents are all full of inaccuracies, do not align with the revised design and number of dwellings. Each application should be taken on its own merit, right? Why then are the comments raised by Kent Highways immaterial due to not raising objections previously? Regarding the application itself, it doesn't comply with several elements of the Kent Design Guide. Distance of refuse from the highway and lack of standing space provision resulting in traffic flow issues and highway safety. The design of the development will overshadow existing properties with a loss of sunlight and privacy. The proposed appearance is not in keeping with the area. There is inadequate parking provision and documented rights of way are obstructed. Regarding the refuse point, the application does comment that consultation has been sought. I see no document from the relevant authority agreeing to this. For vehicles whose height is greater than the access archway, there is no provision for standing spaces. Clearly, day-to-day vehicles, let alone construction vehicles, will not be able to visit these dwellings. Kent Fire and Rescue Services have requested the installation of a domestic sprinkler, thus removing the need to access the site, but a standing area will be required for fire vehicles. There is no comment regarding or from Seacombe. The only ambulance reference is a graphic of a fast response vehicle. Again, height restriction, standard Seacombe ambulance will not pass under the archway, thus requiring standing area. The site plan that outlines the footprint of the July 15 application shows the number of properties has decreased, but it also shows the closer proximity to properties on Grecian Street, now within a metre of the boundaries. There will be a loss of sunlight and overshadowing of these properties. I know obscure glazing is being proposed, but do the residents of these new buildings want to be living in some shoebox with no glazing? The appearance of the design is not in keeping with the area. The houses are Victorian with red brick, not Edwardian with pebble panels. There are 4 parking spaces detailed. I refer to 7.16 of the Planning Committee's report. it's credulous to believe that there will not be additional vehicles associated with these dwellings. That they will not park in the associated turning and refuse areas or seek spaces on the already congested adjacent streets. There are residents whose document rights of way will be obstructed by the layout and density of this application, and the graphics showing vehicle turning circles are not a true reflection. Finally, there is only one site notice placed on Grecian Street. Although previous applications were turned down due to the detrimental effect on Waterloo Road properties, should it be necessary, I would seek for a secondary site notice to be placed on or near Waterloo Road so they can comment. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Granger. Mr. Barnes for the applicant, please.
Good evening. The scheme was first presented to the committee in October 2015. We accepted at the time that improvements need to be made, especially to the parking arrangements. Therefore, we have reduced the number of units from 5 to 4 units and made considerable improvements on the parking layout. At the committee meeting, there were some comments on the quality of the houses and the housing scheme. Since then, prior to this committee meeting, we have built 10 houses of this similar type and had no more than 10 houses granted planning permission in other boroughs. The quality of these houses is not an issue, and this can be proven. In regards to the character of the houses, the site cannot be seen from Grecian Street and is landlocked between two rear elevations of mixed mashed houses and flats. Therefore, in planning policy terms, the street scene and continuation of the character of Gresham Street is not an issue. Taking this as an opportunity, the modern design with elements and cues taken from Gresham Street, for example, the stonework and the detailing in this design will add an architectural interest to the site and is a much preferred option over a bog standard housing type. In regards to the access, there was a substantial reduction in the potential use for the access, a potential reduction of 54 vehicle movements passing through that access per day. In accordance with the building regulations and the National Fire Safety Act, a fire hydrant positioned in the site will provide firefighters firefighting capability in the case of an emergency. As measured on site, an ambulance can pass through the access and drive up to the dwellings. As a direct result of this application, there will be less traffic and far less disturbance on Gresham Street. The site is vacant and dilapidated and fly-tipped and non-viable. Currently, it does not provide any amenity to the local community. The concerns of this application is the main concern of this application is the effect it will have on the rear outlook to the houses on Waterloo Road. The entire development has been designed in direct response to the conditions, and I must strongly emphasise to the committee that considerable steps have been taken to minimise and improve the outlook from these houses. This is acknowledged by the planning department and senior planners, and can easily be justified through examinations of the proposed sections. In brief, the existing view of the undesirable site with high fenced walls and tops of dilapidated garages would be replaced with landscape gardens and just a sloping, gentle view of the sloping roofs of the proposed houses. The application we have...
I'm sorry, you're a little over your time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Call upon Councillor Nagy.
Before I start, could I have the picture with the red car showing the Samaritans up? That's the one. And could you just tell me when I'm left with 1 minute, because there's some things I don't want to finish off with. Is that all right? Thank you. Right, good evening. I was here about a year ago talking about this same site, and in my view, these alterations, which are not major, moving things a few feet, is not going to affect this development. And I think the planning inspector man had it spot on, and in my view, this development is still very cramped, very overbearing, and has a very oppressive impact on all the residents of Grecian Street and Waterloo Road. And that is quite a few residents we're talking about. Parking in Grecian Street, obviously, as everyone knows, is the worst in the borough. So this is not going to make any improvements on it, especially if people have younger adults who have 2 or 3 cars. And as you can see, that is the smallest entrance I've ever seen to any site. All the sites we've seen tonight have got proper roads in. This is not even a proper road. This is someone's little drive to the back. I'm not against the applicant at all. I mean, it's probably going to keep going until something is on this site. But in my view, and which is all, as has been said previously, the views are people's views, and this is still the same as was previous, even with these alterations. There is obviously this has come tonight in updates, obscure glass, here we go. Now, the people residents like Grecian Street and Waterloo Road, are they supposed to put obscure glass in so they don't have to look at this? You know, this obscure glass, it makes it acceptable. It doesn't make it acceptable. These people are going to be living in matchboxes with obscure glass. They can't even look at the view of someone else's house. And that's how bad it's getting. And I'm very concerned as well in the conclusion of the officers who says this represents a valuable windfall addition of smaller housing units. And that, to me, is not a reason for approving it. It's a windfall site. I've never heard of that one before. It's approved because it's a windfall site. And one thing is KCC's, this is a different KCC officer, and he wanted to say things, but got told that because he never said nothing, or nothing was said by KCC Highways, that he couldn't comment on this one. Now, is that true? Because everything should be on its own merit, I thought, when it comes to planning, and we shouldn't have any consideration, as has been said before, of previous applications, only this application. And the other one is, do the residents of Waterloo Road receive any notification, anything whatsoever, that this was coming up tonight? Did they have a letter or anything in Waterloo Road? If those 2 things could be asked, I'd be most grateful.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. There's a couple of questions there. Do you want to go straight on to them?
Yeah, the procedure is to notify by letter immediate neighbours to the application site. And we also put a site notice up to notify anybody else who may be interested in the application, and that's been carried out in this case.
Thank you. I'll open up the debate. Councillor English, I think you asked the floor. All right, okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As the resident has said, here we are again. And I don't know if we should be looking at third time lucky, but I fear not. The third round of drawings, or I believe it's the 4th, after we've had some officer intervention at the beginning of this round of proposals, still hasn't really addressed what the inspector found in 2012, and that is amenity for the people living in Maidstone, in any dwelling that we pass. There should be standards, and if it was in somewhere else where you built another 10 other properties, then I'm sorry, but this is Maidstone. And I'm afraid, actually, the officer hasn't got the side elevations of the drawings that I looked at in the offices. Now, they're not there, because even on my magnifying glass, no. When you look at both the northern elevation and the south, there are no windows. So the only windows that are in these are at the east and west elevations that front onto the entrance and then onto the other 3 properties to the right, and also looking down towards the end of Boxley Road, where you're looking at the backs of people's gardens. And if you have a slightly changed front elevation that these houses do, you can look over towards the very small orifice that you've just driven your car through, and that other emergency vehicles will find very, very difficult to get through. Now, we've seen that various people park behind the Samaritans. And there is an elevation, or there is a drawing there that shows the ability for cars to turn. Oh, that one would have done. There you can see the 2 car parking spaces. There are 4, I believe, behind the Samaritans, which is manned 24 hours a day. This is not a dwelling. This is a service that's provided by a charity for the people of Maidstone and this area. They need to get in and out of that house at any time of day. There are no visitors' parking spaces provided for this. So if someone comes down and they don't really know the area, and they park just thinking, oh, I might be able to squeeze in behind one of those cars parked there, they've just blocked the whole of that 3-4 little dwellings to be able to get in and out. So we've got to go and find out who's blocking somebody. This is inadequate. We're trying to squeeze a pint and a half into a pint pot. The heights of these buildings are still 2 stories. And if you look at the side elevations that we have got from the east and west, you'll note that it steps down. However, existingly, the site is level. So we're going to excavate the site so that we can drop the height of the first house nearest to Waterlow Road so that the angle of the site is dropped slightly. But the next one is the same height. You see, look, they're stepped down. I don't know where we're getting this design from. It may be good somewhere else, but I hope this committee will see that we're just trying to get as much as we can out of this site. Perhaps there will be opportunity to put dwellings on this. I noticed from the floor plans, they show the ability for people in wheelchairs to be in there. And I think that could be the clue. We could be looking at a different type of person who may be able to dwell in this area because they might not need to have a car. So we could be looking at the elderly or partially disabled people. I don't know. But at the moment, this is forming a detriment to the surrounding area. The people living in these houses will not have a very good standard of life because they won't be able to have any light, natural light, along the length of their houses at all. And also the people in Waterlow Road will still have to look straight out. It's the shortest distance possible. Grecian Street is the length of the garden, some 38 or 40 feet before the first house. But Waterlow Road is the nearest. And therefore, I hate to really say this, but I'd love to be able to go back and say the proposal would not provide adequate living conditions for the neighbours and future occupiers of these houses regarding their outlook and provision for amenity space. But I'd love to hear what the rest of the committee think before I make any proposal. So I reserve my right if I may.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Hastings? Sorry.
I waved to the wall.
Oh, I do. Councillor English, I'm sorry. You wish you speak.
I gave way because Councillor Cox is a member for Eastward, but I had indicated previously. It is actually very fortunate that this building is next to this proposed building is next to the Samaritans, because if it is built, there are going to be some very depressed people living in these properties. Just because a house or a housing development is tucked away, it does not mean that the standards within the National Planning Policy Framework for a good quality of design to be met can just be chucked out the windows. Oh, sorry, we can't chuck them out the windows because most of them don't open adequately. So forget I said anything about windows because we don't have many windows. Those that we do can't be seen out of or open properly. In this day and age, I would hope we got past building slums, which people cannot have an adequate quality of life living in. I think it's probable that there are many types of livestock you wouldn't be able to keep in such conditions, let alone people. This application is in principle acceptable, but we shouldn't actually just take on board what is there now. This site is only run down and an eyesore and a slum because it has been run down. We should not allow the fact that a site is in a bad condition, because the owners of the site have allowed it to become in a bad condition, to actually lead us to accept any quality of design because that is better than what is there. And I wouldn't have raised this issue, but it was something that the applicant dwelt on. This application is not acceptable. Councillor Cox has outlined a number of other reasons why, so I don't need to add to those, but I do think that whilst the principle of development is acceptable here, we really do actually have to have some standards, and this does not. I would finally add, it is a great pity that the inspector didn't consider the parking issues. We can't really go into those because he didn't, but this is not quite the worst road in the borough. I think Peel Street might be slightly worse, but it is certainly an area where parking is at a premium. And so if people are not able to get on and in and off this site, which they may well not be able to, they can't rely on parking in the street because there is nowhere to park in the street. Quite often people park double. It has to be seen to be believed. They're parking double and you've got a single file down the road, down the centre line. That is just a ludicrous situation and it is a pity we can't take that on board. So I really do, we'll wait to see what is moved, but I think on what the grounds are, but this application mustn't proceed.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hess, be very patient.
Thank you. I'm going to try and stick to my 3 minutes. Sorry. You've kind of both summed up mostly what I was going to say, but I've waited so long, I'm just going to say it anyway. I can't see what has massively changed from the previous applications. It still looks out of character, and I'm not sure architectural interest would be something I would describe it as. It's still cramped. There is no standing space provision, although, yes, a fire engine could, block the road while it's using the hydrant. Nobody else is going to get down there. It will be completely unpleasant for anyone that lives there, because I wouldn't want to spend my life looking at someone else's house through an obscured window. I get complaints on a regular basis about parking on that road because they're overspilling onto other roads, into my ward. It's dangerous and people can't get around them. There's going to be additional vehicles. Construction vehicles are not going to be able to get anywhere near the site. How are you going to get them under that tiny little tunnel? I don't know. I can barely get through there. Basically, it would just be completely unpleasant for anyone that had to live there, surrounding residents included, and I don't like it either. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hesse. Are there any more speakers? If not, we can... I'll come back to Councillor Cox. Maybe do you wish to formulate a proposal? Or we could use the... If I go to Mr Timms here, if he has a suggestion.
That would be lovely, and I'll add something if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, my advice, members, would be to stick with the reasons for refusal previously. They seem to cover the issues that have been raised. The design, the architectural design is the same as before. Obviously appreciate members aren't keen on that, but we didn't have a sort of design ground in terms of the architecture. It was the design ground in terms of being cramped, overdeveloped. So, I think you can look at this plan and see the change there. So my advice would be that you don't veer from the previous grounds for refusal and introduce new measures. So I would advocate going with the two grounds as previously refused. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was looking back to see if there was anything there. I don't think I want to add anything other. Do they include the amenity of the occupiers? And yes, they did. So could you just repeat what they were, please?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because when I looked at the first reason for refusal, I must say it's not clear exactly what the issue is in terms of their amenity. So I think it probably is worth clarifying that, so that maybe on the first ground it's a little bit more specific on what the amenity issues are. Is it the outlook? Is it the privacy, those sorts of things. But if you refer to that, and we can advise on the suitability.
So I am allowed to say that the people that will inhabit these houses will have a lack of amenity of outlook. Can we say that? Sorry.
You can. I would ask you to specify what the outlook from which properties. Are you referring to all properties, and where is it? At the front, at the rear?
I don't think it's one particular property, really. They all have their failings. If you're looking to the east, you're looking straight onto a vertical wall made of wood. If you're looking to the west, you have a longer view, so you do have sky at least to look at. But it's the backs of people's gardens. To the west is the back of the properties that used to be a factory, which is now a flats. To the west, and they have a very tall, move down, it's like the golden shot, down, down a bit, that wall behind those garages to the right, no, to the west, keep going, right a bit, no, you've gone east, down, there. That is the back of that flat area, which is car park. And they have an old existing wall, which is about 25 or 30 feet. And on the other side, I believe, is just bricks. And on this side, it's been covered with aged wood. So there is no, it's just looking straight onto a wall. So am I going back to the 2012 reasons or for the previous reasons? Do you have them there, please, so that I don't get them wrong?
As far as I can see, you're referring to the rearward outlook of these 3 terrace properties, which would be onto this wall. So I would suggest that the reason for refusal 1 is as it is, and it's merely clarifying its poor living conditions from future occupiers by the poor rearward outlook of the 3 terrace properties. It's good to just clarify exactly what that issue is, and I think that's quite precise.
Is there any way I can say that they are still overpowering in the actual space that they take up? Because I don't see how we can get away, really, with 2-storey here, or repeatedly.
I think that's covered in the cramped nature of the development. Yeah.
But I just wonder why we're still here at third time unlucky, hopefully, but why we're not looking at something. There are other styles here, and I'm quite willing, and I haven't ever been invited to any pre-apps by the applicant, to give my views and the other councillors that are in the ward, because we may be able to offer something that may be more acceptable. As we've said, this isn't a place that you can't have any dwellings, but just not of this type.
Could I say, it's coming out to 10 o'clock, I understand. I'd like to move this, if we can, because are you happy with what...
I'm happy with what's said, so if you want to repeat it, if that's possible, then that would be lovely. Thank you.
The first ground would be, the development would be a cramped form of development, form of overdevelopment representing poor design that would be out of character with the local area and resulting poor living conditions by virtue of the oppressive rearward outlook from the 3 proposed terrace properties, contrary to advice within the National Planning Policy Framework. The second reason for refusal would be as the previous, from last year, the development due to its scale, proximity and the height difference caused by the falling land profile would have an overbearing and oppressive impact on the residential amenity of the occupiers of neighbouring properties in Waterlow Road, contrary to advice within the National Planning Policy Framework.
Thank you very much, that's fine. So I'll
Do we have a seconder? Councillor English, very quickly. Right, okay. I'll put it straight to the vote. In favour of refusing? It's unanimous, I think, yes. Very good. Thank you, members, for that.
Thank you, Chair. Oh.
It's the excitement of the evening. Yes. Sorry.
Right.
Item 20, 16505 427 Bell Farm, North Street, Barming, Kent. And I'll hand... there's one urgent update which you may want to refer to. It's quite a significant one. But I'll hand over to you, James, on that if you want.
Thank you, Chair. The Chair's already advised members of the urgent update report for this. This is an application for the erection of 35 dwellings with associated landscaping, earthworks, parking and access. Members will recall that a previous application for a similar scheme was refused at the committee meeting on the 22nd of October in 2015 on the basis of the impact on the semi-rural setting and character of North Street, the setting of the nearby listed building and ecological impacts. Now, obviously, members will know that that was a result of a previous deferral that sought to address members' concerns, principally relating to ecology issues, retention of the hedgerow. Obviously, those issues didn't come forward when it got reported back to committee and members refused the decision. So what has come back to you tonight is the result of considerable discussions and negotiations, and obviously the applicants have taken account of members' initial concerns on that, and they have sought to address those grounds of refusals with this application. So what you've got before you, this is the red line boundary. The site is an allocated site in the draft local plan under policy H123 for 35 dwellings at 35 dph density per hectare. So this is an aerial view of the site where you've got North Street. This is the application site. So the allocation takes into this area here and obviously this area here, and almost seems to be as a sort of an infill development along North Street. So slightly closer at the junction, you've got the listed buildings. So you've got Broomfield, you've got the Oast House here, and this is where, obviously, one of the grounds of refusal that's previously cited has sought to address the setting of principally this property here. And you've got Heath Road running down here in the junction. So you'll see subsequent photographs of views looking both up North Street and across from Heath Road. So this is a view looking northwards along North Street, and you've got the application site on the left-hand side, and the application proposals now seek to retain the hedgerows along the frontage. As a subsequent issue, as a result of that, obviously you'll note the KCC have raised an objection due to the egress or ingress-egress of the footpath on the southwest corner of the site. Obviously, you know, that is set out in the officer's report, and it is acknowledged that that is there, but officers have negotiated for quite a long time on this application and see that there is also the balance to be struck in this application, but realising the needs for pedestrians and taking them in sight, retaining the character of the site, whilst also acknowledging the concerns that Highways raised, and there are mitigation measures sought within the conditions to address that. This is the junction with Heath Road. So obviously you've got some quite strong boundary treatment along the northern boundary here. Only a small area of the front part of the site is proposed to be developed, which is the allocated part of the site. And then obviously you're looking back down North Street as you come down here. This is looking southwards along North Street with the boundary hedge. Obviously, as part of the submission application, the boundary hedge is proposed to be retained, and obviously I specifically sat here and remember Councillor Harwood raising issues on the ecology matters as a result of the loss of that hedgerow. So that is now proposed to be retained and supplemented as part of the application details. So this is a ternal view of the site looking northwards. As we move down through the list of buildings, this is the main listed building. So approximately in this area you'll see that there is the open space. So in terms of it addresses the setting of this listed building here, and this is the primary aspect, as it's got an open aspect looking out, and I'll address those as we move through the layout details. And this is as you move down North Street. So this is the layout plan of the current proposals. I'll just wish to point out, members, when they made the refusal, obviously, because at the meeting again, I also remember setting out quite clearly there wasn't a concern regarding the house types and the layout. It's principally about the ecology matters. It was principally about the hedgerow as residing, and obviously the ground of refusal on the setting. So what we've got with here, here's the listed building. You've got a sort of an open space area here, which allows the listed building to breathe, as I say, and effectively improves the setting. Obviously, conservation officers made comment on that issue as set out in the report. You've got the ecology mitigation area up along here, and now, I'll show you later, that's been extended slightly further over here to give a greater area for ecology outside the red line boundary, but within land controlled by the applicant. So it is still deliverable to deliver the ecology mitigation. And you've got the retention and supplementing of the existing hedgerow here, and you've got access into the site. So this was the previous refusal, and as I said, I do just stress the issue that members didn't raise the particular concern regarding the layout, and it was principally about the issues along the frontage, and you had a footway running along the frontage here, and it necessitated the loss of the hedge. That has now changed with this resubmission. You've got landscaping proposals, the ecology area I refer to. You've got in effect, your layout, which seeks to address corner areas around here, frontage development, which is then set back. It seeks to adhere to the policy issue, which in the emerging local plan had a 5-metre buffer off this area, and that was principally to retain the hedgerow. The landscape officers commented on these details. You've got the ecological enhancements that they're proposing, and again I refer back to the retention of the hedgerow as part of that issue, and also the ecology area here, which is extended along this area as I previously referred to in terms of the reptile receptor area. This is the issue in terms of the concerns raised by Kent Highways in terms of the lack of visibility as you exit this particular point. However, officers has considered that and discussed these issues with the parish councils, and it is considered that obviously it is important to have a link coming actually through the site into here and linking further north. It is acknowledged that there is a small area without a footway here before it joins up on the other side here, but it is considered weighing all the balancing issues into consideration that is an acceptable and addresses the issues that members wanted us to address on the previous refusal. I'm going to run very quickly through the house types. It is set out in the report. And what you've got is a section detail minus hedge, just to show you what it's like. So hedge is there. This is the area with the setting issue for the listed buildings, so the open space area, and you have your hedge down there as it sort of drops down the hill. So, again, the key issues for consideration are set out in the report. I think the applicant has addressed the key areas of concern that members made previously, and sought to address those concerns with retention of the hedge, ecological measures. Members did accept the slight movement back of the development at the red line into the site area to accommodate the mitigation. ENV6 of the local plan seeks to retain important landscape features, i.e. the hedge. The applicant has sought to address those issues, and you'll be glad to hear on that basis I will conclude my presentation on the basis that the application is now recommended for approval. And those Section 106 heads and the conditions are set out on page 176 and 183 of your report in front of you. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. I'll call upon Mrs. Byrne for the objective.
I am speaking on behalf of the numerous residents who have objected in writing. The previous application was refused on 4 grounds. This development will still introduce an urbanising and jarring character to North Street, a rural lane which is the rural boundary. The plan has 2 rows of houses with tiny gardens. It is not in keeping with the current housing density and character of North Street. The development lies outside the village envelope within open countryside, contrary to policy ENV 28 of the current local plan. The developer has also increased the site from the previous application by 10 metres along the length of the northern site, losing valuable agricultural land. Increasing the site size is inconsistent with the proposals in Regulations 18 and 19 documents. 3 Grade 2 listed buildings are affected. If you allow this development, it will result in significant harm to the setting of these listed buildings, principally Broomfield, but also the Oast House and St Cuthbert's, which has not been fully considered. This development will permanently destroy the heritage of Barming for future generations. Parking for new developments is always a major concern. Residents continue to have grave concerns over the amount and type of parking in the plan, which also has insufficient parking according to your Regulation 19 document. There is a shortfall of 23 individually accessible spaces. Allowing a development to proceed without following your parking requirements is not acceptable. There is a primary school entrance in North Street, and failure to include sufficient parking will constitute a major safety hazard. At the southern site, the shared space is another major safety concern, being opposite the primary school entrance. Children should be able to walk to school. Making it difficult for them to understand the layout of the road near a school entrance is unsafe and will result in more children being accompanied by parents, probably in cars. This is not consistent with council policy. Maintaining the hedge along the boundary of the northern site is positive. This should be retained along the entire boundary, in line with the Conservation Officer's suggestion. We have grave concerns about the proposed pedestrian access through the hedge onto North Street, opposite number 62. This is clearly the tightest pinch point of North Street and at a blind spot where numerous minor collisions occur regularly. The proposed barrier will not reduce the hazard, as pedestrians will still emerge onto a blind spot, resulting in accidents and injury. There is no need for a pedestrian access at this point, and on safety grounds must be removed. To summarise, previous plans were unanimously turned down for 4 main reasons. Since the previous application, there have been no changes to planning policy. This application should be refused because of its effect on listed buildings. It is inherently unsafe, inadequate parking provision, urbanising a rural lane with high density, out of character and poorly designed houses. Please address our continued concerns and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Byrne. Mr. Hawkins for applicant.
Sorry. I've not done this before. This is an application that's been a long time in the making, with, as officers have set out, a previous application refused for this site. This application has been resubmitted on the back of significant negotiations with committee members as well as officers, and we've also presented the application to the parish council, and it does seek to address all of the concerns that were previously raised. The application has seen significant alterations to the northern portion of the site, now with a large area of open space to ensure that the setting of the listed buildings opposite are not compromised, something that the Conservation Officer now agrees with. With regards to the increase of the site area, that's something that's come through negotiations with officers and members to ensure that sufficient landscaping provision can be provided, certainly along the frontage and the retention of the hedge. The retention of this hedge is obviously something that both local residents and members were very keen to see. The houses are now set back behind this, which we feel will retain the semi-rural character of North Street, as well as providing significant ecological benefits which have been highlighted by officers. The pedestrian access to the bottom of the northern portion of the site is seen as somewhat of a pragmatic response. We feel it is important to allow pedestrian access at that point, and as again officers have said, there's been significant negotiations with KCC Highways and officers to ensure the most appropriate landscape but safe response to that particular issue. Since the submission of the application, amendments have been made to accommodate requests of the local ward member with regards to species of tree planting. And again, we consider the house types that are proposed to be of a high quality with the use of ragstone and brick and tile hanging, which we consider in keeping. We think this is really a good example of developers, members and parishes all working together to actually accommodate pragmatic solutions and responses to concerns that are raised. We feel the proposal now complies with the requirements of the draft local plan policy, and it's hoped that these amendments fully address members' previous concerns and that members are now able to grant permission accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hopkins. Councillor Mrs Gooch, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. As ward member, I'm very much aware of residents' enduring objections. The principle of residential development in this area is in the draft local plan, so it is there. It's not going to go away. It's extending our envelope, our village envelope, so to speak, but not significantly, and I appreciate that it was for the specific reason of improving the layout and the setting. The infrastructure, general infrastructure, whether it's highways, libraries, schools, whatever, that was certainly a lot of objections from local residents, but I do note that the developer will be making contributions to those services. The mitigation for landscape and ecology has certainly been improved, and in fact the whole application has been improved and it has made the application more acceptable. It is not perfect, but I think it is the best that it's going to get. We don't live in a perfect world. I think the developers have gone as far as they're willing to go. I would comment that the importance of the footpath, that has been a really debatable point. But the reason I personally felt that it was important to have that footpath is because there will be a new community of 35 homes there, and hopefully there will be youngsters, and I would want them all to walk down North Street to the local shops, to the local post office, to the local bus stops, to the local school. That path will provide a very important link and will provide community cohesion. And I'm very grateful that there has been good communication to try and overcome the problem of the access from that footpath onto, yes, I admit it, it is a dangerous spot, but we walk down that road, in the road, every day. So we're going to have to learn to either put up with it or use the footpath. I would like to just comment finally that there isn't a bus stop in North Street. There is a bus stop at the bottom of North Street where it meets Tunbridge Road. However, our trusty new venture local bus stops on demand, so I would like to make that clear. So despite the objections that I know there are, I do think that this application is acceptable, and well done to officers. Thank you for the efforts that you've gone to with the developer to come to an acceptable conclusion. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Gooch, and thank you for your comments as well. Councillor English, I think you're on the floor.
On a very strict interpretation of policy, this would not be compliant. Thank you. The reasons for that, of course, are that the developer took the advice of their agents and met councillors and officers part way and dealt with the grounds of the previous refusal. And that necessitated taking a small area of agricultural land and moving the site further into the open countryside. So on a test of ENV 28 as to what harm is done, well, no harm is done, quite the opposite. The application is significantly improved. In terms of the other issues, well, as you can see, the local ward member supports it and the parish council do. we've got to this position after a lot of negotiation and hard work. The application is not perfect, but in my opinion, the design is a good design. It has ecological merit. It deals with the serious issues that were brought up before. If I'm tempting fate, I might mention active frontages, but perhaps it would be more diplomatic not to, and to simply bury that one and say that I would actually compliment the design because I know it's subjective. Design is something that two people will have 5 opinions on probably, but in my view, this is a good design, an appropriate solution for this part of Maidstone, and if we do not go forward with this scheme, it would be very hard to improve upon it on what is an allocated site within our emerging local plan, so it will probably go for housing development, and this is almost certainly the best housing development we will get on this site. So I would like to move the recommendation on the papers. Yes, sorry, with the urgent update.
Yes, please, Councillor. You seconded. Excellent. Okay. Councillor Burton, did you want the floor, or are you having? All right. Okay. Then I'm happy to move to the vote, I think, because there are no more comments from councillors. So can I have a show of hands in favour? I think that is unanimous. No. Not quite? No. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Councillor Powell. Right. And against? Anyhow, sorry, I just... And no abstentions, I don't think. Okay. I got it. Okay. Before we go on any further, we've just got one item. We might slip past the 10:30. Are we all okay with that? Yeah. I think we need to go. Okay, good. So let's go on. It's item 18, and it's 16/503786, Barming Water Tower, North Pole Road, Barming, Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just refer you to the urgent update report. This is an application that seeks, previously come to committee, seeks provision of a new access driveway to serve the water tower from the driveway of number 80 Reedwood Road. So, in terms of this is the site, I'm not going to go into a detailed presentation because members have already had that, but effectively you've got the current access by this byway here, and obviously you heard last time that there are all sorts of issues in terms of trees restricting access along this byway issue, but that's the access. So the proposals seek to come through, I hope I pronounced it right, Reedwood Road. If I haven't, I apologise, but that's where it's proposed to come through here. So this is the current access arrangements off North Pole Road, comes down the byway and into the site here. So it's not an ideal access, and the proposals seek to come straight through here. Aerial view of the site, so Reedwood Road, and this is where the proposals would come through here, and this is where the current access comes up through here, and you can see the heavily wooded nature of here, which is causing difficulties with access. This is to the rear of the boundary between 80 and 82, so the access would come in approximately this position across here and go behind the photographer. And then what we've got is the amended proposals. that have come forward as a result of members' previous concerns raised. And that was a concern where members deferred the application at the Planning Committee on the 16th of September of this year for the matters set out on page 124 of the report. The applicants have sought to address members' concerns, and these are set out on paragraphs 1.02. I'm not going to revisit those. And given the additional measures proposed, and I would also set out the fallback position that the individual elements of the work could be carried out without the requirements for planning permission and constructed under permitted development rights. And I think that is quite an important fact, because obviously we are duty bound to determine an application, but needless to say, if members were minded to refuse this scheme could go ahead under permitted development rights. So it's an important factor under those individual elements. So I think what you've got here, as raised by Councillor Harwood at the previous meeting, is some ecological enhancements, some additional planting to soften the impact on Reedwood Road, and also in terms of surface treatment here, some general enhancements. So I think overall, taking all those matters into account, the applicants have sought to address the concerns raised by this committee, and this application is now recommended for approval. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, James. Councillor Mrs. Gooch, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening again, members. Do you know, it's strange, isn't it? You guys have to consider some huge applications with major implications. And here we are with just an access between two houses. And you're thinking, what's going on here? I have to say that it's because of the impact. The parish council and myself thought this was a really lousy idea, inappropriate to the street scene and all sorts of things. And I appreciate that we're going to get nowhere by pressing that, because it is not a sufficient material reason to refuse this application. So what I will say is that I appreciate that we have been able to secure some kind of amelioration and mitigation of what this applicant wants to do. He has gone to some length to overcome the harm that we could see. I would just like to add, on condition 5, could I ask, you're talking about laurels in condition 5, the laurel hedge. Now, the trouble is with laurels, they grow like billio, and they could be taller than the house, the houses either side. Would it be possible, please, to insert somewhere in there that the laurel hedge should be maintained to a height not exceeding the height of the fence? I don't know if that's possible, because I appreciate what has been done to make this application acceptable. Is that possible, please? Thank you. Otherwise, you know, I respect members' decision.
Everything's possible, I think. Is it reasonable?
I love that.
The only issue is that, and I'm not saying conditions are used on that point, but this is an evergreen hedge, and obviously what you do get with an evergreen is you get high hedges legislation that would come forward that would deal with that issue. So there is other legislation, because it would form a continuous hedge of an evergreen nature, then technically there is other legislation that could deal with it. So my feeling is it reasonable or necessary that deals with that point. But also, I would also add that the person who owns the drive, the reasons why he's doing it is he's got major problems with trees on the other side of his current access. I don't think he's going to let them grow all the way up to the point that it's going to tunnel affect his driveway. So that's my view.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Councillor English, yes.
I'd like to avoid relying on high hedges legislation if we possibly can, because it is a pain in the proverbial. So I would, if it is possible to approach this issue another way, I would hope that we could, because relying on high hedges is extremely problematic, and it tends to promote bad feelings amongst neighbours. So perhaps Barming Parish Council could go into the reef-making business or something. But only joking. But only joking. But apart from that minor thing, I think this application, you know, is an improvement. We are where we are, but it's much better. It's even dealt with the prickly issues around the British Hedgehog Preservation Society. So I think we are, you know, it's a reasonable application, and I move the recommendation subject to the comments on the laurels.
I mean, sorry, Chair.
No, go on. No, go on. You go first. No, go on.
I mean, if it's a key decision that members think that is really needed, then then I'm not going to turn around and say, actually, members, you can't put it on. I think you've had difficult decisions tonight. If that's something that members feel that they really wish to put on there, I have set out about the high hedges that could deal with it. That is up to members. I'm not going to push it any further on that point. You could put a condition to say, and the hedge should be maintained at a height at no more than 2 metres above the ground level. And I would ask, if you do that we get delegated, just to make sure I frame that condition.
It sounds reasonable to me, James. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I will second that and hope, above all hope, that 15 centimetres is big enough to get the hedgehogs through.
do you want that minuted? Oh, okay. Right. Well, we've got a proposer, we've got a seconder. I'm going to move to a vote.
Can I just check with that, please? Sorry.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I just want to check. So that's to recommend to approve with the urgent update. Condition 5, no more than 2 metres, delegated authority.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
You okay with that, Ross? Yeah, good. Okay, with that, can I show of hands to approve?
Sorry, Councillor Mortimer, is your hand up? No.
Okay.
So it's 8. 9.
That's 9. Against?
9.
I like that. I don't think there are any abstentions. Okay. Right, members, that completes the items to be discussed tonight. There's just the appeal decisions, which is agenda item 23, which I think we just note.
Can you just wait 1 second?
Okay. Is she all right with that? And there's no chairman's announcement, but just to say, unfortunately, I'm on my travels again, so I know Council English has agreed to take the deferred and possibly the one following as well, if that's okay with you, Clive. Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks very much for your support. And with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you.